Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about autonomy. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, as a software engineering manager, when you give autonomy to your engineers, how would you prevent bad decisions from being made, and how would you stop yourself from interfering with their decisions to not ruin the autonomy? I would make sure that the bad decisions that are being made are like not so bad. Negligible is the term, I think. Uh, that's the thing that I would make sure, because I usually argue that if you've done your homework as a manager or as a tech lead or whatever you are, you should have established some type of work framework for the teams. In other words, the things that are necessary in order to work in a professional capacity are there, and they are working well. People are on average happy, they can accept it, or like they're happy enough with it, so that there is not this constant need for like rewrites or constant need for migrations or like things like that. As long as the bulk of the needs are met, that's usually good enough. And then there should be some type of shared product vision of what are you building, how are you doing it, who are the customers, who should you be listening to when you try to scope your stories, and so forth and so forth. That sets a cadence of importance for what the team should be focusing on, and that usually reduces down the quote-unquote bad decisions to just basically the code level or at the pull request level, between coworkers. And so I try to mitigate that part usually by telling people that, or establishing some team principles. And I have a few, but one of the ones that touch on this one the most is that you should over communicate. Basically, that means that if you're doing something new, you're adding a new library, or doing something different, then and that sort of affects more people than you and your current story, then you should inform the team that you're doing this. Basically, you show people that, yeah, this thing here is bigger than like one or two people. Have a look at it. I'm trying this out. Oh, I want to change to that library. I want to do this thing, and so forth and so forth, which invites to a bigger discussion, which is sort of the benefits with having more of a democracy type of setup, rather than like a dictatorship. It's more likely that you will have a well-rounded set of ideas around a change of some sort, and if it is a good change or if people are supportive of it, then it happens, and then then it's not really, hopefully, a bad decision at the very least. There is a few exceptions to this rules which is sort of where the dynamic of the team is very important, where you might have a one or two very strongly opinionated or vocal developers in the team, and some people who are sort of just a little bit more passive or so forth, which means that basically anything they want becomes they get that by default, which is a bit of a dangerous situation. But that ties into hiring, for example, where you hire people who have who are complements of each other, and that's the personality thing that you sort of have to look out for. It's usually not a good idea to have too many I just do it for the money people together with one really strongly opinionated philosopher who has like all the ideas, because then usually these sorts of things can become fairly unbalanced very quickly. Ideally, you want to balance the team well enough that they can have these sorts of more collaborative discussions about whether or not to do thing A or thing B, or so forth and so forth. But at the very least, I start with the work framework, because even it doesn't matter which team it is, like that's always a good idea. And I don't see a lot of tech leads or managers or something and people like that do that. I mean, for the managers, I understand it, because usually they're incompetent when it comes to all things technical. They're just on average they're like people, almost like more HR focused people than anything else. And so the best tip I can give such an individual is to make sure that you have some type of technical leadership within your company, because you're going to need it. If you don't have that, what happens is usually that the developers usually sort of scramble to figure out what am I supposed to be building, how am I supposed to be building it, and so forth and so forth. And maybe that's fine for your company. Maybe And that's usually how it goes. You hire the first person who starts in the project, and when you start working, is usually the person who creates the entire stack. And that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a very good stack or anything like that. And then the constant state of we need to migrate to framework A or technology B or so forth, like constant migrations and so all that sort of stuff, comes from the fact that you have this unestablished work framework where you haven't decided on this is the general stack that we endorse at this company, like you're working with this language or these languages, these frameworks and so forth, because you want to have some measure of control over what tech people are using, because as I said, otherwise it changes with the winds. And the more teams you add, the more diversity you get in the code base and the overall system, which is a fairly serious problem. And it comes from, as I said, that you're too loose. You're like allowing the autonomy idea to go to its extreme. And I think that especially when a person asks a question like this, it indicates that you're a bit of a junior manager, in my opinion, at the very least, because the goal is not to give the team full autonomy. The goal is to make people feel included and feel that they have a say in what they do at work. That autonomy is a very important factor in that, but just letting people do whatever they want is not, like, it's the other extreme, if that makes sense. You can absolutely tell people that this is a bad decision, but I argue that it's better for you to try to establish a cadence of priority and a work framework that sort of makes the times that you have to tell people that you guys think this is a bad idea, we should do this instead of that, is as few as possible and far between as possible. And you do that by having a well-established work framework. And what I mean by a work framework is very simple. You have a tech stack that you endorse, like this is the big tools that I mean, every single little tiny library is not important, but like the main tools. What web framework are you using? What database have you standardized on for, like what purposes, etc., etc. Some people call it a tech radar, but basically these are the tools that you pick, and try to make that as narrow as humanly possible, because trust me, it's cheaper for you to find developers who like to only work in Java than it is for you to hire all the different kinds of people who like to write things in F# or Haskell or Scala or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Who just like that cost is higher than just saying this is the thing that we are working with. I promise you that much. And it's not gonna kill creativity in your company. Maybe for a few snowflakes out there, but these are people you don't want working for you in the first place. So what I want you to take away from this is that preventing people from making bad decisions is fairly easy. You have to establish a work framework and then sort of accept that you can't micromanage every person to like fully every single time. And so the best idea for you is to make sure that the teams have the same sort of setup. They know roughly what technologies they are supposed to be using. You standardize on like these basic tools like logging, databases, web frameworks, asset management, CDNs, etc., etc. All of these sort of things are like, it's just that there is a architectural decision like this is the thing we're doing, right? And of course make sure that that works well enough for your company, because that gives people some type of framework to work with, or like some type of right, so these are the boundaries of the work. And this is the environment I find myself in. Most people adapt fairly quickly to that when they get into the company. And then after a little while they will have ideas of improvements and things they want to do in a different way. And then you should establish the other thing, which is make sure that they're including people in these decisions, like that there is a shared vision and they know that, all right, this is the way we're heading right now, but I want to do something slightly different. Then encourage them and say, all right, cool, try it out. But you have to tell other people about it. Don't just do it. Explain to people why you want to make this change, so they can motivate them why they want to make a bad, not a bad decision, but why they want to make this decision. And by creating this environment, you mitigate a lot of these quote-unquote bad decisions. There can be imbalances that can happen if you have the wrong set of people, which brings us to hiring and so forth. But I think that you should remember that the autonomy is freedom under responsibility. In other words, you want to allow people the most amount of autonomy without compromising on the end goal. Because a team that has full autonomy might, in many cases, they might not actually be happier just because they have full autonomy. I see it all the time. They have no backlogs, they have no presidency, they have no leadership whatsoever. And without that leadership, they sort of just fuck around and actually lose motivation because they feel that there's no meaning in anything that they do. And so you have to find that perfect balance between having a work framework or a vision, like the thing that they're supposed to be doing, and allowing them to make some decisions on their own. So as much autonomy as possible without losing the sensation of meaning and the results, like the end goals. That's the sweet spot. And I like to say that it's more important to have people feel included and hear them out than it is for them to feel like they can just do whatever they want. Have a great day.